joining us on the program right now. Our show, like I said, brought to you by G2G Bars, all natural ingredients and no preservatives. Let's kick off the hour with Zach Joachim. He is the VCU reporter for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Zach, thanks for being on the program here with us. Let's get started here. How is Ryan Odum's team doing this year when it comes to, these big-time opponents? This is just their time of year, I feel like, for VCU.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. There were certainly high expectations going into Ryan Odum's second season after they won 24 games in his first year, but lost to Duquesne in that A-10 final last year, and then ended up getting to the quarterfinals of the NIT. It's a team defined by their experience and guard depth and defense, right? They struggled a little bit early in the year in those big games, lost 2 in Charleston at the Charleston Classic, which really hurt them, to Seton Hall in Nevada, both games that they were up double digits in the second half and let kind of slip away down the stretch. But they've cleaned that up in conference play, ended up 15-3 in A-10 play, shared the regular season title with George Mason, who they played in the A-10 title game on Sunday in what was an outstanding atmosphere at Capital One Arena. So I'd say early in the year, they struggled a little bit in those big games to close them out down the stretch, and then really figured that out in the second half of the year. And I think their experience started to shine in those clutch moments, right? This is a team that's built around 5 graduate players in Joe Bamisteel, Max Shulga, Zeb Jackson, Philip Russell, and Jack Clark, one of the more experienced teams in the country. And in A-10 tournament play and A-10 play down the stretch, you started to see that shine. It's a top 30 team in KenPom adjusted defense, so I'm super excited to see this VCU defense go up against what I hear is a really high-powered BYU offense.
It's a great matchup. I think it's one that a lot of people that get into the NCAA tournament are circling for a number of reasons. Ryan Odum is somebody who we're very familiar with. He did a great job at Utah State. Not surprised at all that he's having this kind of success at VCU. This is what he does. Why has he been such a great fit at VCU, and why has he been able to have instant success at that program?
I think, as you guys know, he has a super calming presence. He has moments where he can lay into his team and get intense, and a couple of times where VCU had a slow start in a game that on paper you didn't think they were going to get challenged that much, and maybe they sleptwalked a little bit through the early parts of it. He did that. But all in all, just in moments like when they're down 51-50 to Loyola Chicago in the A-10 semifinals on Saturday with 5 minutes to play, and then they're up just 59-58 against George Mason with about 2.5 minutes to go in the A-10 final, he has really excelled at getting this team to trust one another and to focus on their keys and focus on the things that they're good at in those big moments. So I'd say just his calming presence, and as well, very good recruiter, but really knows how to work the transfer portal, right? Was able to bring in Philip Russell, who's a UT Arlington transfer, was the 6th man of the year in the WAC last year. Jack Clark, who's traveled a winding college basketball journey from LaSalle to NC State to Clemson and now to VCU. So has brought in a couple of pieces that have really worked well. And I think in the first year that he was at VCU, he had a lot of moving parts. He had an injury to Sean Bairstow, who you guys know well, and they missed him a lot for the early parts of the year. Max Shulga had a sports hernia that he played with for much of the season. Joe Bamisteel was one of those multi-time transfers battling the eligibility saga with the NCAA. And so they missed all of those pieces for bits of time during that season. And this year they've been able to largely stay healthy, aside of a couple early injuries to Zeb Jackson. And so down the stretch, you've really seen them to playing that brand of Ryan Odum offense that's so much fun to watch, right, where the ball is just popping around the perimeter. It's incredibly unselfish, and it's a wonderfully free-flowing offense that I think people here have fallen in love with, because there was some trepidation when he took the job at first, right, because he was a departure from the Shaka Smart coaching tree. And at VCU, ever since that 2011 Final Four run, you had Will Wade here for a while, who was on that, who was an assistant on Shaka's staff. And then you had Mike Rhodes, who was another assistant on that staff. And so when Ryan Odum came in, people were all saying, how's this going to go? He's a departure from the typical VCU coaching tree. And there were some bumps and bruises in that first year, but they've really figured things out in the second year, and I think are playing their best basketball down the stretch heading into the NCAA tournament.
Speaking of other guys that we know here in the state of Utah, Max Shulga, as you mentioned, the combo guard that ended up being the A-10 Player of the Year. How big of a deal has it been for Coach Odum to be able to kind of just continue that path of greatness that he was already on and really maximize what you got out of Max Shulga, who now this year, as I said, was the Conference Player of the Year and seems to be playing his best basketball right now?
How wild is it that they've been together through Max's whole college career, right? I mean, that's so rare in today's college basketball landscape that Shulga and Odum get to spend the entirety of their time together, even with a transfer of schools in there, and Odum making the shift to VCU. So last year, Shulga was very much a volume scorer for this team, and he was the closer. He was the guy they would look to in clutch moments. But like I said, he was dealing with that sports hernia that he actually suffered in the summer prior to last season. So he was dealing with it throughout the year, had off-season surgery to repair it, and also considered going pro last year, right? There was a time where people in the VCU community thought Max Shulga was gone a little bit, what would that be, about 10, 11 months ago now. And he did a workout with the Spurs, and he was committed to transfer to Villanova for a time. And people were freaking out about losing Max Shulga. But he went through the NBA draft process, got some feedback from scouts, didn't end up going to Villanova, came back to VCU, and that was when the momentum around the season really started to build, when people realized that VCU was going to have Max back. He was all-conference last year, as you said, A-10 player of the year this year, and he's still been an elite scorer much of the time for VCU, but I think the story of his season is his all-around game. His defense has really improved. He's been outstanding in the rebounding battle, and he's just been able to read the game and decide what VCU needs from him on a given night. In the first round of the A-10 tournament, he only had one field goal. He had 2 points, and if you'd have gone into that game, St. Bonaventure coach Mark Schmidt said, if you told me before this game Shulga was only going to have one field goal, I'd say we'd probably win, or at least we'd have a really good shot. But he had 11 assists in that game, was very much a table setter for this team, crossed the 1,000-point threshold in just his 2 years at VCU, which is incredibly impressive. So I'd say the story of this season for him has been really developing defensively and in the rebounding battle and in his conditioning. He's playing a super heavy minutes load, and he's been healthy all year, and he's been very much the straw that stirs the drink for VCU.
VCU's had an incredible season and a great record, but they have not had a chance to be, or haven't beaten, a ranked team this season, and BYU will present them that opportunity on Thursday. Have they discussed that or that fact or the desire that they have or the challenge they have in beating a team like BYU, a team from a big conference?
The non-conference strength of schedule was pretty bad, right? I think it ended up at about 280 in the country at the end of the year, so they were not tested a whole lot. The MTE in Charleston wasn't particularly strong. That Seton Hall loss really hurt them. And at the end of the year, when people were thinking about at-large hopes, they were worried that was going to be their downfall, because Seton Hall ended up having a really bad year in the Big East. Certainly, I think it's an opportunity for VCU to prove that they were the conference favorites coming into the year. They haven't been able to go up against an opponent all season like this. And so, those are very much the conversations in the VCU community. Everyone has thought for much of the year that this was a team capable of making an NCAA tournament run and winning a conference title and competing against some of the country's best. And they were almost ranked. They were, when Mississippi State was 25 just a couple weeks ago, VCU received 87 votes in the AP Top 25 poll. That was leading all of the group of others receiving votes. So they were right on the verge of it. They got up to number 25 in the coaches poll as well, which was their first time ranked in the coaches poll since 2019. So I think that this fan base, this program, these players, these coaches are hungry for that opportunity to prove that they can compete against an elite Cougars team.
I always love hearing when people go, but that VCU's going to have to come out and play at that altitude. And you're like, all right, well, I don't know how that actually works out, but getting guys used to coming out, playing in Denver is not something that if you're VCU do very often, certainly during the rest of the regular season, but, getting around and playing in some of these preseason tournaments or wherever it might be. How much of that is a concern for being at a place that is a little bit of just a, it's a 45-minute flight for people from Salt Lake and for BYU to come over the mountains there to be able to play in Denver. They're already used to playing at some elevation. Has that been a concern, or does it really matter? It's
definitely a concern in the fan base right now. Obviously, BYU a lot more used to it. Odum and Shulga are used to it, right? So I think that helps them. Not that Odum's going to be playing any minutes himself, but he's at least used to managing things in the altitude, and Shulga's used to playing at it. They played at New Mexico this season, and Donovan Dent had an outstanding game for New Mexico, and VCU lost that game, but they at least have a little familiarity with playing at some altitude. But to answer your question, it's very much a concern in the fan base, and it's a concern that BYU lost on Friday, right? So, and VCU obviously got to their conference title game on Sunday. So not only do the Cougars have a shorter trip and they're used to the altitude, they have a significant amount of rest on VCU in those 2 days after the Rams played 3 games in 3 days leading through Sunday and then had to get on a plane on Tuesday. I think the hope is that VCU's depth will help them out in that regard. This is a team that's going to rotate 7, 8, 9 guys on a consistent basis. and bring Brandon Jennings as a freshman that's really contributed off the bench. You have two bigs and Luke Bamboye and Christian Furman who've rotated a bunch this year. And their depth helped them a lot in the A-10 tournament. And I think the hope in the VCU community is that's the thing that gets them over the hump with battling the altitude, is that Odum's able to rotate 9 guys or so to keep their legs under them.
VCU is one of those teams that's a trendy pick to pull off that 11-6 upset or one of those upsets in the tournament this year. And for good reason, because this program has a history of doing that. They've proven that they can do that over the years. And it looks this year one of the reasons why they have that ability and why BYU should be concerned is because VCU is so good defensively. Why are they so good defensively, and what allows them to be?
So it's a couple things. One, I would say Furman and Bamboye are elite shot blockers. Bamboye ended up, just as a freshman, at 74 blocks this year, which I believe is 7th all-time in VCU history for blocks in a single season. He was on the All-A-10 defensive team, and between the two of them, they're 7th in the country in block percentage. So they can really protect the rim effectively, and they lead the nation in effective field goal percentage. So they can really contest shots well. They're not going to give you any easy looks, especially inside the arc. Now, they're good closing out from 3 as well. But against in the A-10 final against the George Mason team that really wants to pound the interior, Mason kind of had to live on the outside because VCU's length in the front court and in the back court, they have a lot of really long athletic guards. They're just outstanding at contesting and not giving you any open looks on the catch and fighting through screens and everything along those lines. So this is a really great perimeter defensive team and a wonderful defensive team at the rim. So they're not going to give you any easy looks. I think that's really what they've leaned on this year. It's not havoc, right? When everyone sees VCU, I think they still think of Shaka Smart and the Final Four run and Briante Weber and picking up full court and forcing live ball turnovers. That's not this VCU team. They will pick up full court sometimes. They will apply some defensive pressure, but they're more of a half-court defensive team that's really played better at a slower tempo this year. And so it's very much a different brand of defense, but it is still a nationally elite defensive team. And I was looking at BYU's metrics too. And the two things that stood out to me, and if I'm wrong here, y'all correct me, I'm not very familiar with the Cougars, but they can turn the ball over at a high rate. I think they were in the low 200s in turnover percentage, and they're not a great free throw shooting team, also in the low 200s of that. And this is a VCU team that wants to get up into you, be physical. The fouls can rack up on them sometimes. And so I think if there's a path to victory here for VCU, it would be to try and get under their skin a little bit, be physical defensively, use their depth, create some turnovers, and force the Cougars to beat them at the free throw line.
VCU sounds like a Big 12 team. I'm dead serious. Like, that's what BYU's been facing, and to BYU's credit, they've gotten better at it. Last year was a struggle against those physical teams, and Duquesne got them in the tournament. And I think that's why this is a concern on the BYU fan side, Zach, is that BYU has struggled against physical teams. Although they figured it out here in February, they got to win at Ames, they got to win against Arizona in their place. But you're dead on, and with all that analysis, BYU's strength is going to be shooting the heck out of the basketball and getting up tempo and getting this game into the 80s and 90s. That's what they're going to try to do, and VCU is going to do the opposite of that. So it sounds like a great matchup. It's going to be a lot of fun.
The committee loves their stylistic contrast, don't
yes.
they? And I love that we got this matchup because it is very much that. Is there a little bit of deja vu in the BYU community with the 6'11" setting?
Oh, you have no idea.
Everybody's up in their head.
They
bro.
are triggered,
Everybody.
Man. They are triggered.
And then they do picture Shaka Smart, the Shaka Smart era, and then they go, well, there's no chance. They got no chance. So they do. They have that you just go back to the things that you think that these teams are in the tournament, and certainly BYU fans have not seen a lot of wins in the NCAA tournament, despite the fact that they've gone to now their 32nd tournament. So, but it's going to be fun to watch, and it's a Thursday midday game, and so we're excited. Anytime the tournament rolls around, we're pumped about it. Zach Joachim, he of course is covering VCU for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. We appreciate you taking extra time here, Zach, and have fun there in Denver, man.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited for the game. Appreciate you.
There you go.
Thanks, Zach.
All right.
Great analysis. That was fun. Now you know VCU.